Hey, Dad, I have a question for you that may make you just a tad bit uncomfortable. Would your wife and kids describe you as a generous person? Now, if you're listening in the car and you have your wife and kids with you, and they're all laughing hysterically and pointing at the radio, going, ha, 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 he said generous, then guess what? They probably wouldn't. Would your coworkers, would your
Yeah.
pastor, would your fellow volunteers at your kids' sports league, would someone in your life who knows you fairly well call you a generous person? And if the answer to that is no, or you're not sure, then the other question is, would you like for them to call you that? Like, would you like to be known
Mm.
as a generous person? Because if you would, today's show is for you. We would
Hey,
be happy to help.
hey, speaking of generosity, how about Range Leather coming on as the sponsor for today's show? Olivia, I got her one of the Range Leather bags, crossbody bag, and she went on a road trip and a little bit of hiking and went to a big public, concert, outdoor concert, and had all her stuff right here in her little Range Leather bag. Sent me a photo of it while she was out there. Man, they're high quality gear, and we really appreciate them being a sponsor of Father on Purpose.
Well, and what was cool was that, Kyle there, it was nice enough to sponsor the show and, tell us, that he would help out. But when he sent you and me those two brand new Teslas, I just thought that was over the top. But you know
Pardon
what?
me? Wait, what did
Oh
you
my
get?
goodness.
What did you get?
Whoops. I have said too much. I thought for sure he sent you one
Oh
too.
my gosh, you are so
Oh
silly.
man. Shucks. I'm sure yours is in the mail. I'm sure. Just any day now, Lawson. Just keep checking, keep looking.
Come on, Kent.
It's gonna
Get it
come.
together, brother.
So recently I spent 3 days being just lavishly treated to some really fun experiences. And I want to kind of veil the identity of the person who did most of this. I'm not totally sure he would be okay with me mentioning his name on
Right.
the podcast, but what I'd like to describe is I'd like to describe the events of these few days to some degree, in an effort to help guys realize just the power
Mm.
of generosity, the
Hmm.
power of generosity. And I know what some of you are thinking. I run a nonprofit, and all this is going to lead to the big conclusion at the end called, if you want to be generous, feel free to send Manhood Journey all your monies. Well, go right ahead. I mean, feel free to be generous with our ministry. We could sure use some extra dough. However, that's not the purpose. The purpose truly is to just unlock this idea for a dad. And because you really do want your family to see you as a generous person. You want your wife to see you as a generous person. You want your children to see you as a generous person. Guess why? Not so that they will stand up at your funeral and just say, golly, he sure was generous. And you get all these accolades for being generous, because it's part of the character of God the Father. It's part of the character. The love, it says in the New Testament, that he lavished upon us, the grace that he lavished upon us in Christ. He is a generous God. And if we're going to show his total character to our children and our wives and all those we bump into, it's going to have to at least be marked by some degree of generosity. Now, let me get to the end. And when we get to the end, it's not just generosity with your money, although that could be really important. There's 9 or 10 or 12 other ways we're going to cover at the end of today's shows on how you can be generous, even if you're cash constrained. But I went on this 3-day adventure where things that were paid for me were like all my meals, and not just like, some Taco Bell, quick kind of 2 taco kind of meal, really nice meals. Friends of mine were invited to come along with me. This person wasn't just generous to me. They were generous to friends of mine. They were generous to my family. My family got to come along on a lot of this with me. This person was generous with their time during those few days. This person footed the bill for some golf outings. and was generous enough to drive me around the rough so I could try to find my balls, the ones I didn't hit in the lake. I hit several in the lake. This person was generous with their time, their money, their own family. His family came to these events. He introduced me to members of his family. He was generous with his network. He invited some other people to come to this event, multi-day. It was like just a clinic in generosity, day after day after day. In fact, early in the experience, I said to him one-on-one, I just said, hey, can I please pay for something? Like, I mean, whatever, dessert, I mean, whatever. And he just looked at me and was like, hey, man, don't ask again. Like, he was almost
Wow,
like
that's awesome.
militantly generous, if there's such a thing, right? He was like, look, man, I got it. No, the answer is no. You can't pay for anything the whole time you're here. And I was like, wow, opened up their home, opened up his relative's home. I just, the list is really, really long. And here's what's really cool. Those few days were remarkable, super fun. I was able to just rest in the generosity. I was able just to show up, crank out my golf bags, get on the cart, play some golf. Like I didn't have to worry about anything. Meals were paid for, all of it. And the reason I want to share that is some guys are listening and they're like, well, sure. Yeah. If I had a vacation home, if I had, a lot of income, if I had relatives who had places that people could stay at, I'm resource constrained. I'm not that guy. Okay, granted, fair enough. But here's what I suspect. I've only known this guy about a year and a half. And he is just entering into his 60s. And my hunch is he didn't start becoming generous at 58 and a half.
Right.
I will bet you that at times in his life, before he had some extra cash or some extra resources, I'll bet you this guy was generous, and his persona is marked by generosity way before he had some extra cash to aim toward maybe a ministry like Manhood Journey. Don't you think, Lawson, that generosity starts other places than just like our wallets?
Yeah, for sure. Let me just say too that we had this mutual friend, and so I know I'm tracking right along with you on what you're talking about and of what your experience was, you and April and the kids and your friends and their family. Man, I just want to tell you, you do so much for a lot of people that it brought me joy to see the generosity that was being just poured upon you guys because, you know, like I appreciate what you do with your life and what God has given you, and you are pouring into other people. So to see that come back in that form really brought a lot of joy to me. Um, Luke 6 verse 38 says, "Give and it will be given to you.
Mm.
Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap." For here's the key that I want to remember. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And I think you experienced it being measured back to you. You give of your time, of the resources, of your advice, of your wisdom. And for that to come back, be measured back to you, I think it was evidence of Luke 6:38. And the reason I want to bring that verse up is because generosity, you're right. I happen, like I said, I know who you're talking about. And I happen to know that there was a lot of times in their lives where they did not have the ability to do what he can do today.
Yeah.
But their mentality, the way that they approach others with their love and their generous gift of doing for others, when they had very, very little, they would welcome people into their home regardless, and they would share a meal, and they would love on them with just this overflowing measure of doing for someone else. And so the mentality that Luke 6:38 I think is underscoring is the scarcity mentality is the opposite of generosity. Scarcity mentality says, I don't know where my next dollar is coming from, or I'm in a hurry, or I don't have the energy. And so I've got to very carefully dole out what I don't think I'm going to get much more of.
Mm.
And that's not trusting God. That is the measuring of this. I've got to hold it in. I've got to hoard
Mm.
it for myself, because what
Yeah.
if I don't get more? That's the opposite of what we're talking about of generosity as a dad to our kids. Where I feel stingy, where I've been stingy before, is more oftentimes than not is time.
Yeah.
And and that's because I feel like I have to get so much done and I only have a certain amount of time. We've talked about this before, versus my only concern is
Mm.
spending as much time with my family as I can. And that generous mentality bleeds into everything else, in life. And so granted, not everyone has the resources to just take in a family and pay for everything for them for a 3 or 4 day long weekend. Got it. But what do you have?
Well, and I'd like to interrupt Lawson and say, if you do happen to have those resources and you're looking for a family to treat to them, we will volunteer. Like I mean, it was hard for me to do that for a few days, but I'll do it again. If you need to learn how to be generous and you need someone to practice on, we will show up at your vacation home. Like I, I'm,
At
I'm
your
going to do that.
vacation home.
I'm
Right.
because I'm a giver, because I want to
Right.
give you the
Right.
opportunity to serve other
Let
people.
someone feel how it feels to be generous to someone.
Exactly. It
I
says
got it.
it's more blessed to give than receive. So I'm actually doing you the favor by
Oh my gosh. Uh,
I'm a giver. No one's ever accused me, Lawson, of not giving. It's just
hey,
what have they accused me of giving?
hey, what do you think about that scarcity mentality that I'm talking about being kind of the opposite?
Yeah, I mean, I remember several years ago, there was a guy who did some work for us at Manhood Journey, and he needed he needed more hours than we could afford to give him at the time. And I remember connecting the dots for him to get another job in the ministry world. And I didn't do all the work. I just made one quick text and I got the ball rolling. He had to actually go, interview and sell and do all the work. So all I did was create a small relational connection. But what's funny is I know the leader of this other ministry, and he called me at the last minute and goes, "Hey man, I think we're going to hire that guy you sent our way." And I said, "Great. Like, I'm really glad about that, because I can only give him so many hours. Y'all can give him 3 times as many hours." And he goes, "Well, won't that leave you without an A kind of writer? Won't you be kind of in the hole?" And I'm like, yeah, I probably will be for a bit. And I said, "But you know what? Like, I'm sure God's got something for us. I'm not too worried about it." Now I know I hesitate to tell that story because I'm the kind of the hero of that story. So I don't want to like, oh, look at Kent. But I think what's important is it almost never really occurred to me that like somehow I would be at some major loss in this equation. Because I know God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And if he wants me to have a new writer, he'll make it happen. So it really had very little to do with me and everything to do with God's character. Like, that story is not about, isn't Kent generous and giving up his writer to some other ministry? That story is about, isn't God generous to all of us, because he will backfill whatever need we have. And in most cases, he'll backfill it plus, like it's going to be even better than we had it before in most cases. And so, like, as I've walked through life, I've noticed that I can approach some things as a scarcity mentality where I've got a finite list. And usually that is in the area of time, where it's like I get punchy and I get quick and I get aggressive. I'm already aggressive. I get more aggressive when I know I have short time. And that's me mentally with scarcity of time. So like the anti to that story is, man, there are times when I'll start a meeting with people, and the first 5 or 8 minutes are them telling me about how their weekend went and why they're so sad and how much their life is so bad. And sometimes I'm in that meeting and I'm going, okay, we're down to 52 minutes now. Like, it's like, it's bad. Like I can be really dark in the area of scarcity of time, where it's like, I got 60 minutes and I really don't want to burn 19 of those minutes, hearing your sob story about your sad life. Like, it's pathetic. I know that that's bad. Like, I recognize saying that out loud. Some guys are cringing right now when they hear that. But I also know I'm not the only one. I also know I'm not alone in that, where when I get in business mode, when I get in high efficiency mode, I squeeze out a lot of tenderness, a lot of compassion, a lot of care for individuals. Man, I can squeeze that out really fast when I'm
Mm.
like, let's go. We got 40 minutes. Let's get this show on the road. And that's usually, I do that a lot more with time. I tend to be a bit more generous with other resources, but with time, man, I can be really tight.
And I do it somewhere. I'm looking at a situation and go, yeah, somebody else will do that. Someone else will handle that. That's not a generous thought. And if we trust God, I happen to have been with the folks that you were with shortly after you were with them, and your family's experience with them. He was refreshed.
Ah,
He
right.
he was
That's the way it
on
works.
cloud nine because God refreshes us. The Bible says that he will refresh us when we are
Yeah.
generous. And then Second Corinthians 9 verse 11 says you'll be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion.
Mm,
And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. And I want to remember that. I want my kids to experience that. Like we receive thanksgiving. That will
mm,
be the result of what generosity gives us. What God gives us is a thanksgiving, a spirit of being thankful. And give it a try. If you feel like you're running too fast and you're cramming too much into your
yeah.
schedule, be be purposefully generous with a bit of that time.
Mm.
And talking to myself, maybe don't go, yeah, I see that over there, but somebody else will handle that. Let me be generous with whatever I have in that moment and
Yeah.
go help and go give. And I bet you God
Yeah.
will fulfill his promise where it says, and through us, your generosity will result in
Mm.
thanksgiving to God.
Well, and one thing you pointed out, Proverbs 11:25 says, "A generous person will prosper, and whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." And to your point, that's the way that person feels. That's the way we all feel when we've been able to take a resource. Because frankly, it's not my money, it's not my time, it's not. It's God's time, right? It's not your contacts, it's not your network, it's not your job, it's not your car, it's not your airplane, it's not your nothing, right? It's you don't own any of this stuff, and so it's all on loan from God. So then when we take that and we give it to somebody else, we can just look at God and smile and do the thumbs up and go, man, that was awesome. And the generous person will be refreshed. I love how the King James Version says, Proverbs 11:25. It says, the liberal soul shall be made fat. The liberal soul shall be made fat. There should be a liberality mentally.
Yeah, just give, 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 give,
Give.
give.
What do I got? What do I got? Can I give it away? Can I give it away? And then it says, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. And so there's a way of thinking. And that's really what I hope we can get guys to on today's episode. I want to close with, close it. We're not going to close in 2 minutes, but the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about 10 different ways, at least 10 different ways that you can be generous, even if you are kind of cash constrained. Now I do want, because I know a lot of guys are living paycheck to paycheck, or they don't have a lot of extra money, or their schedule right now has very little free time. Like I totally understand that. But I do think, to your point, the question we got to ask ourselves is: do we have an abundance mindset, or do we have a scarcity mindset? So when we look at that word liberal, the liberal soul, or the one who blesses others, usually that word in the Old Testament, it's berachah, and we would use that word in English as the word blessing. So it's like the guy who blesses others will be blessed. In Genesis 27, if you remember, like Esau sold his blessing or his birthright for a cup of stew, basically. Um, that's the idea. It's the idea that some blessing is coming down, and that if we're generous, we're redirecting those blessings into the lives of other people. It's more, I think, Lawson, a posture of our heart than the position of our portfolio.
Ooh.
It's the posture
Ooh.
of our heart, not the position of our portfolio. And that's why I started with, would people describe you as generous? You don't got to be running around shoving $1,000 bills in people's hands to be described as generous. It wouldn't hurt, you know. And if I'm with you, feel free. But I'm just saying that's not the only way. In fact, I might even argue, in some ways, there's other ways to do it that might have even a greater impact, depending on life and situation. But I do want to check one off the list. So if you're looking for the list of 10 ways to be more generous, um, money is on the list. So let's not breeze past it. You may not have millions or hundreds of thousands you can just give away to whatever or support this or that, but you might have tens or twenties. You may have that young couple who's living paycheck to paycheck, and you're not making big bank, but you're ahead a little bit. You can pay your bills, and you know what they need? They need a $30 gift card to Chick-fil-A. They need you to pay for dinner. That's what they need. And I remember one time, and I think this is true. And if you're out there listening to this, Matt, you know who you are. One time we went to Cracker Barrel with a small group, and bro, we were financially strapped. I mean, we had very, very little extra any given month. And I remember a friend of mine handing me a gift card as we went into the restaurant. So imagine there's 8 or 10 of us meeting. We're all going in to the restaurant together. And he kind of, oh, by the way, on the porch of the Cracker Barrel, hands me, I think it was a $50 gift card, if I'm not mistaken, from Cracker Barrel. And he goes, hey, I had this and I don't really need it. You can have it. So he gives me his $50 to pay for the dinner we're about to have, right? And I'm almost 100% confident that he went in early, got that gift card in order to give it to me so that he could buy my dinner and not embarrass me in front of 8 other people.
Dude.
And he's a friend of mine. I need to call him and ask him, but he's the kind of guy who won't even tell me the truth on that. He'll be like, oh no, I just, he loves to give. He loves to give and not be known as the giver. And I've seen special. It. I've been in the middle of a couple where he's done that. And I'm like, they won't even find out. Those recipients won't even know they received. And I'm almost positive he did it. So guys, listen, if you do have the money, if you can afford that $5 gift card to Starbucks for that struggling artist that or whatever, let's not just skip past money and pretend it doesn't help. It does help. It can help. It can mean a lot to either a nonprofit you care about, or that couple in your life, or that next door neighbor who is in some dire straits right this second. You could slip it in their mailbox and they'll never know who it even came from. There's ways to do it.
Yeah.
Where you can do it. And I know of people who have directed cash to me. They have directed gift cards to me in ways where they can't be traced. And they don't know this, but I think I've figured most of them out over the last 30 years. but they did a good job of making it hard to find. They hid their breadcrumbs pretty good. And it's just, how cool is that? Right? How cool is that? So if you have extra cash, make some use of it. Why not? But Lawson, I want you to talk about the second one on this list, time. How can we be generous with our time? We talked a little bit about it, but let's just expand that a little, and then we'll bounce through the others. Because what I'm going to do with some of these others, I'm just going to tell stories of guys who were generous with me in these ways. Because
okay, cool. Me, I like that. Yeah.
When I think of generosity, I see faces. I see tons of faces of men and women who were generous with me in these other ways. This is not Kent's list. It's the list that's kind of happened to me from other people.
What's going on, dads? Check this out. Hey, in the world of fatherhood, balancing style and functionality is key, right? Range Leather gets it. Offering products like the sleek Elbert wallet and the American flag hat. It's perfect for dads on the move. Made from the finest Horween leather, Range's products don't just look good, they are built to accompany you through every dad duty with elegance and resilience. Snag your next dad essential at rangeleather.com and save 15% when you use code MJ15 at checkout. Head to rangeleather.com to get your swag. That's RANGE leather.com. Well, I'm gonna pull back in scarcity mindset when we're talking about time, because when you are not generous with your time, I think you're living from a place of scarcity, and you're trying to cram too much in. We talked about that on a former episode, and so what generous time management looks like is doing your best to fit in margin so that you feel like you have some ample opportunities to offer that extra 5 minutes. Um, I picture walking around at work, and I'm not saying like coworkers who walk around, wasting time is the way to be. Not at all. But in your day to day, whether you are at work, whether you are at the grocery store trying to find a parking spot or going through there, if you are head down on a mission at all times, then maybe check that. We've all been there. But you can feel when someone has this mindset of, yeah, I have a minute for you. Of course I do. What's going on? And so, whether that's with your wife or your children, I think an example of that is when you are going to and fro around, running errands. If the errand is so much more important than spending the time together, then you've got that in reverse. You've got that in reverse order. And so take a moment to grab your kid and bring him along with you and say, hey, let's go on a little adventure together. We're gonna run some errands. And I want to make sure that you and I are talking, and dad, be a good listener, ask some questions, be there. People can feel that time when they know that you're being present with them. Jesus, when he was doing his ministry, his life was just one interruption after the next.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
But he wasn't like, oh man, come on, guys, like disciples, gather around. Look, when I'm getting ready to give my sermon, when I'm getting ready to speak before the group, will you please keep the beggars away? Will you keep the lepers? Like make sure that nothing gets in my way. He was all about the interruptions. That was the important thing, because that was someone displaying a need. And that's what he came for. So us as dads, I think it kind of bleeds into the third one, but managing your time such that you aren't thinking that it's scarce. Build some time in, build some moments in, and be ready for those interruptions, because you are there to meet other people's needs in your family. One of those is listening. And when you are rushed, and when you are like, okay, hurry up, let's get through this story because I've got something else going on.
Did my wife call you? Did April call you and tell you to bring this one up?
Right.
Like, really?
Yeah, dude, everybody's like guilty. Me. Everybody is guilty of having those moments where what the person feels is they came to you for something and you weren't with them. You were distracted. You were doing something else while they're talking to you. You're thinking of something else. And if that's happened to you, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where you leave that interaction and go, they don't care.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I can think of a friend. His name is John. And we've probably been together 100 times, from volunteer activities to he does some work for Manhood Journey. Really great guy, one of my closest friends. And frankly, I cannot think, let me put it this way. I cannot think of a time when he and I were together where he had a device interrupt him and interrupt our conversation. I mean, I'm literally trying to scroll back in my head through hundreds of interactions where he is not the guy. Now, I do have other friends who can remain a bit nameless right now. who have their phone and their Apple Watch, and like talking with them is like talking with, you know, a chihuahua that just ate coffee beans. Like they just like and every 12 seconds they're looking at their watch, they're responding to people's emails, uh, and they think they're having a conversation with me, but actually they're having like 42 miniature interrupted moments that don't matter over the course of 60 minutes. Cause it's like, wow, really? And I'm trying to get better at that, right? I'm trying to get better at that because, man, if you're too busy to give somebody your undivided attention, you're too busy.
Yeah.
You are just too busy.
And hey, look, dude, listening is free. You don't have to have a bunch of money to be
Well,
a
you know
good
what?
listener.
Okay, you know what's interesting? I totally agree with you. I think what's interesting about listening is that it is free in the sense it doesn't cost you money, but you know what it costs you? Your ego. The price of listening is your ego. Because most of the time, the reason we don't listen is because we think whatever we're doing is more important than what you're saying. It's a pride issue. If you think you're a bad listener, it's not because your DNA, it's not because your Enneagram, it's not because your dad or your mom, it's because you have a pride problem. Me too. We do. I do. We all do. But like when I can't listen to you intently, it's because I've decided my life's more important than your life. Whatever. Whoever's trying to get a hold of me right now, what I'm going to do next, whatever. I've decided I'm more important than you. It's a pride issue. The fourth way I want to talk about. So we talked about money, time, listening, connecting. Maybe 6 months ago, you and I had a guest on the show named Scott McClellan. And Scott is retired now, CEO of a couple businesses that he built from scratch. Really neat guy. And I've gotten to know Scott over the last several months and have just come to really appreciate him. Really insightful thinker, very clever, very persistent and faithful leader of some dynamics in his life that have made it very hard for him to lead. And so I've gotten to really appreciate him. And you know what? You and I were connected to him by a guy named Jim out of Cincinnati. 7 or 8 months ago, my friend Jim in Cincinnati connected me to Scott. Well, what's interesting is about 5 years ago, I was connected to Jim from a friend of mine named Pat in Dallas, Texas. About 10 years ago, no, 8 years ago, I was connected to Pat by a friend of mine named Paul who lives in Atlanta. And so, okay, wait a minute. So from Paul to Pat to Jim to Scott, and Scott's already introduced me to a guy in Cincinnati. We're back to Cincinnati. So like, okay, what I find really interesting is sometimes we may be like cash constrained or you may be time limited, but you might be relationship rich. You may have access to people. And I don't necessarily mean like famous people or rich people or even influential people, but you may have access to people who can benefit other people, And I remember a friend of mine who was trying to figure something out in a certain church setting in America. And he called me 7, 8 months ago, and I connected him straight away to a guy named Trey down in Jacksonville, because Trey's been in that world. Trey knows that world. And I could take two people. I could take Mark in South Carolina and Trey in Jacksonville, connect them together because Mark needed what Trey had and I knew what Trey had.
Yeah,
perfect. I didn't have anything.
Right.
I just knew what Trey had, and so so you might be in a position where you go, oh shoot, man, I've got access to some interesting people. Maybe they have expertise. Maybe they have life experiences. Maybe they have skills, or maybe they do have money or time or strategy. And you can connect two people together. That is a way of being generous. Yeah. Connecting two people who need to meet each other.
I love that. That's a great story too. The fifth one is prayer. Have you ever had anybody as you're going about your life that is just super free with their prayer, like on the spot?
I think of one guy specifically whose name is Octavio. Hello, OT. How are you, my friend? Hope you're listening. Octavio has texted me almost every week for over a year. And he texts me basically a prayer for me. And he knows what's going on. He'll ask and pray for something specific. It's not just generic. And then he'll text me a piece of a Bible verse and then a word of encouragement. It's 2 or 3 paragraphs. I've probably got 100 of them in my phone. Definitely more than 50. I'm more than once a week. But like, this dude is like a prayer warrior, and I am on his mind and I am on his heart. And he's got some kind of either either he has photographic memory or he's got a calendar where he says, oh, don't forget to pray for Kent today and text him. Either way, I don't care. This dude has me covered. And he is really thoughtful, very generous with his prayer. And I can think of others, but that's the first one that comes to mind.
And when you are around someone like that, um, doesn't it just like make you? It's inspiring. Like I love being, and sometimes it's even caught me off guard. Like I'm talking to someone and blah blah blah, this and that, struggling with something, and they go, well, let's pray about it, and then boom, they're just writing a prayer,
Right.
and it
Straight
it
up.
just it's just instinctual.
Yeah.
Um, Another one is someone who is free with their insights and counsel.
Mm. Oh,
I happen to have this guy at work who I really, really respect, and he did something for me where I have had a blind spot in the way that I am leading, and he, frankly, he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" And dude, it was tough for it was
mm.
not easy to receive, and it was tough for him to give. Um, and he wasn't sure, should he do it? Was the time right? That sort of thing. But what he offered me was real counsel.
Mm.
And, it didn't cost him anything. I'm not saying that,
Mm.
but he wasn't sure, it was kind of he felt like he told me it felt like it was kind of a risk to bring this up.
Mm.
And, fortunately, I was in the right frame of mind and was ready to receive. And I knew I needed it. Like halfway through, I kind of knew like he's speaking truth to
Yeah.
me. And so offering someone insight, talking to your children about something that's going on in their life and
Mm.
offering them your perspective, your counsel, because maybe you've been there, done that, or listening to your wife give you some counsel
Mm.
and receiving that freely. What that does now is, in my case at work, this guy now feels better. He
Yeah.
feels more free to offer me, and I want it.
Yeah.
Like I want to hear from him. I have such respect for this guy. I want him putting his insight into my life. And if like my wife were to do that and I shut it down, then she's going to
Yeah.
feel less free to do that. So on both sides of the equation, with giving and receiving counsel or insights into
Mm.
what we're doing and how we're parenting, how we're being a dad, how we're being a husband, how we're being a worker or a leader or friend.
Yeah.
Receiving and giving freely is something that I think God honors.
Yeah. And I think even the way you receive it is a mark of generosity in the sense that when you take it well and you go, man, thank you for that feedback. I'm gonna think about that. I'm gonna try to adjust. That's a way of you being generous back. It's the virtuous cycle of generosity where the counsel's coming at you, but you could reject it, or you could say, yeah, but what are you, perfect? I mean, there's lots of ways out. And when you don't take one of those exit ramps, but you stay in, that's a mark of generosity all by itself.
Yeah.
And I wrote a book called Wise Guys 2016. Go get it. It's all about how to get counsel, because I've had so many men speak into my life. Um, I've probably lost track. And I can think of one right now, just because we have a cup of coffee set up in about 10 days, Monday, in a week and a half or so. And his name's Greg. And Greg is a guy I meet with probably twice a year. I'll get some of Greg's time. And his counsel is always like like protein. Like there's no fat on it. It's just all rich protein. An hour with him is like 3 hours with most other people. You just can distill so much. And he's always been very generous with counsel and feedback and input. And he's seen ministry from a much wider angle lens than me. He has a much different set of experiences, has managed a ton more people than I've managed, and his counsel and feedback is irreplaceable. But man, I've had that from literally hundreds of men have given me
Mm-hmm.
counsel over the last 30, 40 years.
Yep.
That's a big way we can be generous, is if we have insight or we have
Mm.
counsel. Can you when people come to you and they need it, can you give it? And then even I would even say, Lawson, real quick, just on that topic of counsel, how you give it can be given either generously or can be given in other ways. And what I mean by that is it's one thing to go to somebody and go, hey, stupid, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Let me help you do it right because I do it right and you do it wrong. So you learn from me. Okay, well, yeah, fair. And a savvy person will receive that counsel, but you've made it kind of hard to receive. Is there a way where you can offer it up, delicately, carefully, one-on-one,
Yeah. Right
private,
on.
in the form of a question? All
Right.
that is the mark of a generous heart.
Right on. Yep.
Um,
Another one, number 7 on our list is encouragement. Encouragement in it given out generously. Whoa, bro, this
yeah.
world is tough. We are living in a
Well,
world that
okay, real fun. I want to go back, rewind the tape about 20 minutes, and you're going to see you put on an encouragement clinic in this show today. When I was describing how I was handled for a few days, you turned it back around and said, "Yeah, but you've given a lot. You've done a lot to help people, and it's good to see that come back on you. You encouraged me 15 minutes ago in this show,
good. Well,
and
good.
you've done that 100 times. You've done that 100 times, and you are like a shining example of how to encourage other people. You do an amazing job of that, and I know several guys in my life who are like that. It's just from the minute I'm with them till I leave them, I'm on a ride up. It's like the slope is upward, and I'm going to feel better when I'm done being with them because they're just so stinking encouraging. It's great.
And it doesn't cost anything, back to your point about what would your kids describe you as generous, and being the guy who's listening to the podcast live with his family in the car as they start laughing because sorry, Dad, take that as a note. You may not be the most generous guy out there, but let your kids see encouraging words coming out of you freely and in abundance. But it's not just something that like is mean. I don't want to say meaningless, but like give it to your children and have it
Yeah.
land relevantly by putting some thought into it, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Absolutely.
just walking around, hey, nice hat, like throwing throwing out
You
little
don't look near as stupid today as you did yesterday. No, that's not really encouraging. That's not how
you're
it
not
works.
as stupid today as I've seen you do. Yeah, another one, number 8. You've talked about this before, and I think you've even talked about this guy before. Access, like
Yeah.
being accessible,
Mm-hmm.
being someone who people um, are not intimidated to approach. Man, I want my children to feel really free to share
Yeah.
things with me, and I want to be the kind of coworker and the
Yeah.
kind of friend who people know. We throw this term out, open door policy, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it more than that. There just is no door. You are we are in this
Yeah.
together. What I
Yeah.
have is yours.
Well, and what's interesting, I can think of at least two examples here. One is a friend of mine used to play pro baseball, and we were doing an auction, a charity auction back in the day for another friend of mine's ministry. And this friend of mine in pro baseball said, "Hey, man, come to one of the games and bring whatever you want autographed. And I don't care, 10 things, 5 things, I don't care." He goes, "You bring it. I will get you in the clubhouse and I will just walk it around. We'll get a bunch of signatures from a bunch of pro athletes." And I'm like, that is a great idea and actually quite efficient, like, let's go. And so I did one time. I drove up to Cleveland. He was playing baseball, went to the Cleveland Indians back in the day when they were still called the Indians. And he took me in the clubhouse. We got a bunch of autographs. He got me and my dad some really great seat, like media pass kind of seats, because he had access to something that frankly didn't cost him anything else. They were paying
Yeah.
him millions of dollars a year to play the game. So he had access and he let me be part of that access. Or one time, Lawson, I went to lunch and I met some guys that I'd never met before. We just all got brand new relationships. And I'm talking to this guy and I'm like, "What do you do for a living?" And he goes, "I'm a flight instructor and I don't know anything about flying." And I go, "Oh, that's really interesting." And so we got talking about him being a flight instructor. He goes, "And I do flight instruction for UPS, for the packaging company." and I live in Louisville, where one of their largest airports in the world is here in Louisville, Kentucky. And he goes, "Hey, by the way, I could get you in the flight simulator. Would you ever want to go in it?" And I'm like, "What are you doing today at 3 o'clock?" And he goes,
Yeah.
"Let's do it." So like 3 hours later, I'm in the UPS flight simulator, which is super hard to get into. And I won't say his name in case he should be fired for this, but uh, it was awesome. It was one of the coolest experiences because you go out in this thing in the middle of like a giant gymnasium and it floats. Like you got to walk across a bridge that raises because the whole thing actually moves. Um, and then I wrecked planes in Denver. I wrecked planes in Paris. I wrecked planes in New York. It was awesome. Nobody died. But he had access to something that, he could, within reason, invite people into. And so sometimes your generosity just comes in the form of, what do you have access to? You might work at a really cool factory, and the local public school would love to bring their students out for a field trip.
Yeah, good
And
thought.
you could
Right.
make that
Right.
happen. And it's no
Right.
skin off your teeth. It'd be fun. Let's go. What do you have access to that you could share with other people? That's another mark of a generous person.
Yep. I'll get an occasional phone call from this guy that's in my life, Van, and he is just checking in. He
Yeah.
just wants to see what's up. He's really good about someone pops into his mind. He listens to that. He feels like maybe God might be tugging on him to give them an encouraging word or anything that I can pray for you about. It's not unusual for him to say, I've got another guy in my life, my brother-in-law, Bo, anything I can pray for you.
Yeah.
And that'll come like out of the blue.
Yeah.
And bro, that's a blessing. That is a person who is generous with their love.
That's right.
Who is generous with their desire to help other people feel wanted, needed, important, remembered. And so I think number 9, checking in,
Yeah.
is something
Yeah.
that we can do.
Just,
And it doesn't
yeah.
cost, you don't have to have a big fat paycheck or anything at all like that. It can come in many forms, but stopping, taking a moment and looking at somebody and go, how you doing?
Yeah. Just about a week ago, we were doing something one evening, and Hunter, who produces our podcast, found out that my wife was not feeling well one evening. And sure enough, the next morning, about 7:30 in the morning, Hunter's texting me, "How's April feeling today?" Just the check-in, the quick kind of, "I heard you. I know that was not pleasant or was pleasant. Like I wanted to check in with you after you went to the Masters. I was like, how was it? Just the quick check-in doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but are we checking into people? And would they say, man, that guy, he listens. When I said, this was going to be a really high mountain experience, he checked in with me after to see how it went. Or when I said I'm really in the valley, he checked in. Just checking in. To your point, man, it costs you nothing. Right. It's totally free. What'd you have down for number 10, Lawson?
Number 10 was something I actually got to see in one of our warehouses. We have a rule that anything heavier than 50 pounds requires 2 people to lift. And we work with steel, a lot of the fittings, a lot of the pipe product, or just heavy boxes full of stuff. And it's real easy. All of a sudden you've pulled your back out because you tried, I'll give it a shot. Well, what I saw was another person in the warehouse saw someone about to attempt it and whistled and ran over there and goes, "Hey, let me give you a hand." Like, he probably prevented that person from overdoing it, and I just thought, great. That's the mentality. That is helpfulness. In this case, at work, likely saved someone. And you know what? It also, I think, demonstrated like we're a team. We're in this together. Yeah. I am here with you. And so helpfulness as you are just going through life, are you like like I was not, and I have been many times, unfortunately. I look over and go, somebody else will do that. Somebody else will handle that. Like if you see something and your first reaction is to help, is to reach out, is to be a friend, is to have somebody's back,
Mm.
That is a generous soul.
Yeah. One time I remember being in a meeting in Grenoble, France. And, English is kind of the international language of business. But this particular meeting had about 400 people in it, and 395 of them were native French speakers. And so the guy leading the meeting, an EVP, super senior executive in this company of thousands and thousands of people, he pulled a few of us aside, mostly just Americans, and he just goes, "Hey guys, sorry, in order to be really clear today and to go fast, I'm going to do the meeting in French." He goes, "So I know some of you won't be able to hear that." He goes, "But Fred here will translate for you." And so like the 5 or 6 of us, it was both encouraging, but also super humiliating in a sense in that there's like 400 people in the room and there's this little pod of about 5 of us sitting off to the side with a French guy translating everything for like an hour and a half. But it was the generosity of him taking the time to even tell us beforehand. Like, not only could he have sent the guy, Fred, the delegate, to tell us, but he took the time to tell us himself. And he was like 10 rows above me on the org chart. Like, I mean, way, way senior executive. He didn't have to tell us anything. He could have just started speaking in French and I could have been lost for an hour and a half. Like, he didn't have to do anything, but he went out of his way to pull the non-French speakers aside, assign us a translator, and I just thought, man, he's a really nice guy, Philippe. He was a very good guy to work for, but it was a very generous attitude. And I experienced that even, especially in that company. When I worked there for a long time, I can think of 10 people who helped me out some way at work, navigate the buses, navigate the trains, navigate the social constructs of being in Paris. Like, there was a lot I needed to learn. And I had a ton of folks who were more than willing to help me through that process.
Yeah. All right, so check it out. I'm gonna throw this over to you. Take us home. Luke 6:38 says, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." And then Proverbs 11:25, and I'll end here and turn it over to you. Dad, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. That's a promise from God.
I want to remind you, Dad, that sometimes the reason we want to do something is so that our kids learn a lesson, so they're kept out of danger, so they are given an advantage. And all those are good. That's not a bad motive. But let me tell you about a motive that is higher, more eternal, and better than those motives. And it's the motive to properly and adequately represent the character of God the Father in our families. When we do things that help our children correctly understand who God is, we're doing some of the highest and most important work we can do as a father. When you're generous in one of these 10 ways or 100 other ways, you are not just benefiting other people, getting a pat on the back, redirecting resources in a way that's efficient and effective and, kind. Those are all great. But let me tell you what you're actually doing that is of supreme importance. You're giving your children a picture of an aspect of God the Father that they desperately need to know is true. They need to know. They need to know God is not playing the shell game with them. God is not withholding anything that they need. God is not stingy. God is not spiteful. God is not a two-way street. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. That is the picture of generosity. That is the picture of generosity. And so when we're generous, we might accidentally get a pat on the back. Lawson and I even took great pains today to not say the name of the guy who we were both talking about for a big chunk of today's show for 2 reasons. One, I didn't get his approval to share all that. And secondly, I wanted the glory.
He wouldn't have wanted it.
No, he wouldn't have. The glory to go to God the Father, because we didn't invent generosity. We didn't wake up and go, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's be generous." No, in fact, we're the opposite. We invented selfishness and all that. Dad, when you're generous, you're showing your children a picture of God the Father that is so needed and so valuable that will pay back dividends in their heart and mind for eternity. So go be generous. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.